Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Exorcise Your Rights. I'm here with Kevin Lucia, which I actually meant to ask, is it Lucia or Lucia,
It's
Kevin?
actually Lucia.
Lucia. Okay, thank
Lucia.
you.
Yeah.
I knew there was one more question I wanted to ask before we got started. That was it. So Lucia, Kevin Lucia, and he is the ebook and trade paperback editor at Cemetery Dance Publications. His short fiction has been published in many venues, most notably with Neil Gaiman, Clive Barker, David Morell, Peter Straub. He was such an awesome guy. I love him. Loved
Yeah.
all of them, actually. There's not a single name I'm not loving. Bentley Little and Robert McCammon. His novel, which is what we're here to talk about today, is The Horror at Pleasant Brook. This will be out on October 13th from Crystal Lake Publishing. So first, congratulations on your
Thank
first
you.
novel.
Thank you.
That is so awesome. Tell me, what was, because your first novel, I'm always curious, what inspired you to write it? Like, it's not an easy task.
Well, yeah, and the novel has not come easily to me. I mean, if anyone checks out my bibliography, they'll see lots of short story collections and novellas and novella collections, and we're going on 12 years in here, and here's my first novel. It certainly was my first attempted novel. I had a lot of other previous attempts, and honestly, this novel had a very, very simple inspiration. And I was at my school where I used to teach. I teach at a new school now, and I was down in like one of the basements, just poking around looking for some spare furniture, and someone had left this awful, terrible rubber mask just laying in the middle of this, like as a Halloween mask. It's like, how did this possibly get? There's always rumors that some of the students had keys to the basements and would get in there and mess around and things like that. But there's just awful mask that's just laying there in the middle. And I thought to myself, that'd be an interesting starting point where somebody who discovers a mask and then they have this irrepressible urge to put it on. And of course, that's a bad idea. That part didn't actually make it into the novel. I ended up changing a lot of that. But the horror at Pleasant Brook actually started as like an online exercise where I just started writing something online, and I wanted to make it as gruesome as I possibly could. So I wanted to like, and I'm known primarily for my quiet horror. So for me, the horror at Pleasant Brook started as an exercise in how many people can I possibly kill, and in how many different ways can I kill them. And so every chapter was like, okay, well, I haven't disemboweled anybody yet, so it's time to disembowel somebody. And that's really it was a very simple plot exercise where I wasn't prepared for it to suddenly grow this cast of characters and start talking about all these things of substance and stuff like that. I was just kind of looking at it as an engaging writing exercise, but then I just kind of grew into and where I think I failed before in my novels is I tried to make the plots very complex. Like you mentioned Peter Straub, and he's one of my favorite authors, and he's known for these multi-layered, very
Mm-hmm.
literary, sometimes non-linear novels. And I always tried to write that and always failed. Well, this was just a very simple plot exercise that suddenly grew into a novel. And I found that you can make your characters complex, leave the story simple. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where the horror at Pleasant Brook came from.
That's awesome. That's really good advice too, because yeah, if you think about it in life, usually we're going through pretty simple situations.
Yeah.
So awesome. So there's your good advice for the day, guys, for how to write a novel. This is my burning question at this moment. Did you put on that mask?
No, I did bring I did bring it here home. It's in my horror cave, and every year I would bring it up to my classroom, hang it up for as part of my Halloween decorations. And I would tell the kids, I said, obviously, if you've all watched a horror movie, I've now doomed you all. This mask is probably going to come alive and eat us or something like that. So no, I never did put it on. I kept it as a decoration only.
Oh, that's awesome. What do you think? Like, how do you think it got there? Because that is pretty interesting.
Well, there was the rumor that there was a tradition that somehow a pair of senior boys had gotten a hold of a master key, and the rumor was is they had gotten themselves a sweet setup in there where they would snuck an old TV in there and then snuck in like an Xbox, and they would sneak in there between classes and smoke and play video games and just skip out. So that's the only thing I can assume, is that some kids did have access to that. It begs the question is who left it there and why was it left there, and all that. And you can see what great story fodder that
Oh,
was.
yeah.
There was probably some truth to that rumor. So
Yeah.
knowing some of the senior boys I've taught over the years, I wouldn't put it past them.
That's funny. Yeah, and plus, like, school basements are just horror fodder. I mean, that is just the best place for something like that to happen.
And these old basements used to be bomb shelters from the 50s.
Oh,
So they're
wow.
dirt.
Yeah.
They're dirt. They're like dirt storage areas. So they've even got that smell, kind of that earthy smell and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, the concept that nobody will hear you scream in here.
Yeah. Yeah. That, yeah, there's some pretty deep. I would just go down there for like I need a bookshelf, or because that's also like the furniture graveyard, that sort of thing. But there are some pretty deep corners that I was like, I'm not going all the way over there. That's for sure.
Oh, that's funny. Well, and the horror at Pleasant Brook, so I'm going to assume Pleasant Brook is the high school in the story, or the school. It's at the edge of the Adirondacks, it says. And this link, by the way, everybody, is in the description, so you can go grab the horror at Pleasant Brook yourself and check this out after October 13th, or pre-order it right now.
Right.
Um, I'm curious, have you ever been to the Adirondacks? Like,
Oh,
how did you?
so we grew up going to the Adirondacks. As a kid, we went camping there every summer. Either we went into a cabin or we went camping for the whole week. And then after I got married, my wife and I would go up there every summer for many, many summers. So yeah, I grew up in the summers in the Adirondacks. And when my wife and I first started going there, and I was first deciding I want to be a writer, I would sit by the campfire all the time and scribble things. And the Adirondacks, it just has this presence. I don't know how else to describe it, except anybody who's been to the Adirondacks seems to be like, yeah, I totally, this is, it's so deep woods out there, and it just has this haunted feeling. And I said, if I ever write, stuff, it's going to be set in the Adirondacks. The bulk of my stuff is set in a made up town called Clifton Heights, and Pleasant Brook is a different Adirondack town than I made up. But I've always wanted to set stuff there. So yeah, I love the Adirondacks.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, so that's probably really shows up in the writing, because this is authentic research here. You know this place.
Yeah, I don't know like a local, but we go hiking up there. We spend every summer up there at least a week or two. So I would call myself passingly familiar. Not like a
Okay.
local, but yeah.
More than Google mapping it, right?
Right, yeah.
That's funny. What would you say if some of your students, I don't actually know what grade you teach. I don't know if they're at this level where they might read this or not, but I assume if you're hanging up creepy masks, they probably are.
Yeah.
What are you going to tell them if they read this about, like, is this our school? Is this modeled after, like, how much of reality is in the story?
Well, actually, in the horror of Pleasant Brook, not much. There are no there. Well, there are major scenes at the end inside the school building, but it doesn't really take place in the school because it actually takes place in a small town 2 years post COVID that's going into another COVID shutdown.
Oh,
They're all
man.
remote. They're all remote schooling, and they're kind of social distancing again and things like that. So there are some key scenes at the end in the abandoned school, but not a lot happen. That's a different novel. I had a I've had for years thoughts of writing a very thinly veiled novel at the school that I used to work for, and then blowing it up. So that's a different novel that hasn't come yet.
That's funny. What was I mean, it's a big difference to do shorts versus a novel. What are some of the challenges that you faced, and how did you kind of overcome them? Like, for anybody who is trying to write their first novel right now.
Well, I think what threw me is short stories and novellas came very easily to me without outlining. I never really had
Mhm.
to. I maybe outlined a short story or two if I was on a deadline, but mostly I like what Robert McCammon says. Is he says that for him, writing is like messing with a Rubik's cube until all the colors click into place. And that always worked really well with short stories and novellas, but I tried that for years with novels and it just didn't work. I had too many moving parts. I would always end up with 600 pages of something. And I
Mm,
knew that in that 600 pages, there was probably a good 400-page novel, but it would just collapse on the weight of itself. And I think, as I said earlier, I think I'm a big fan of Stephen King's 1,000-page novels and that, and Peter Straub's very complex novels. So I was trying to recreate those. But what I found with the horror at Pleasant Brook was make the plot simple. You can bring
mhm,
all the complexity to your characters, and then the way they react to the plot, that's going to be the complexity you're looking for. But I hung complex characters on a fairly straightforward, simple plot, and that worked for me. Um,
mhm.
and also giving up and finally saying, okay, I'm going to outline now. I've tried several novels with outlining, and that didn't work, so we're gonna outline now.
Yeah, that's funny. Do you think you'll go back to short stories, or are you
Oh
kind of
yeah.
novel only now, or are you going to do a
No,
blend?
it's every story has its own demands. You know what I mean? Short stories, I only write if I get a request for it, or if I just see a submissions call and I'm like, I really want to get. And it's just really like right now I'm working on a novella. I've got on several novellas that are in like in me they're kind of in limbo that I'll finish eventually. I have another novel that needs to be finished. It's really the story just kind of decides.
Mm,
Usually what happens is I'll sit down and write a short story and be like, oh no, this is too long. It's gonna be a novella. Then I'll sit down and write
yeah.
a novella and be like, oh no, this wants to be a novel. So it
Hmm.
really depends.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit because we're talking about Pleasant Brook, but what are some of the other things? Like 12 years, that's a long time to be writing. So,
Yeah.
like, what are some of the other works that you have out?
So the bulk of my other works are all center around a fictional town in the Adirondacks called Clifton Heights. It's very very heavily influenced by Stephen King's Castle Rock or Gary Brombeck's Cedar Hill or Charlie Grant's Ox Run Station or Bradbury's Greentown, where all the stories take place in the same town, and there's lots of Easter eggs where the stories cross over each other, and you don't have to. I have the Thing Slip Through, Devourer of Souls, Through a Mirror Darkly, The Night Road, Mystery Road, and October Nights, and then Joy Leonard's Last Horror Movie Marathon. Those 7 books all take place in Clifton Heights, but they don't have to be read in any order. That I kind of designed it that way. I didn't want it to be a because they're not sequels. They're not. They
Yeah.
just. But if you read enough of them, you're like, oh, I remember that character. He was just like a side character in this other story, or he was in it for like 5 minutes, or I recognize this location. He's talked about this location before. So I guess you could say I spent the last 12 years building up this fictional town, where every now and then I'll be like, oh, it's time to write another Clifton Heights story. And
That's awesome. Who is your like we sneak ourselves into our work. Who is you? Who are you in your work the
so
most?
the main writer of the Clifton Heights series is an author by the name of Gavin Patchett. And he's kind of like me if everything in my life turned out wrong. He's a recovered alcoholic. He had a brush with big writing fame, and he blew it. He did come back home, and he has recovered, and he's writing again. But for whatever reason, he has access to all the dark secrets of Clifton Heights that nobody else does, and he feels like he has to write them down, and he writes them down, and it's brought him a second career, but he's always taking people's miseries and turning them into stories. Should I be doing that? So he's my shadow self, I guess.
Oh, that's awesome.
He things didn't work out the way for him, but he's not. He's no longer. he's now recovered and healthy, but his world is a little bit more shadow than mine is.
Yeah, so he's like the cautionary tale.
Yeah, I guess so. Yes, yeah.
That's awesome. Where do you have like a plot, or are you just letting those kind of come out as they're gonna come out?
What I like about that is when I realized what I was doing, that that I was going to start writing all these stories. For me, it's just the idea that a town is filled with so many different kinds of people, and every one of those people, everyone has a story, and it's their own story, and especially marginalized people. And see, those are the people that don't do well in Clifton Heights, unfortunately. The ones that are marginalized, or the ones that are kind of ignored, or they're kind of, and they're the oz that disappear, or they, so things happen to them, and people kind of shake their heads and go, oh, that's such a shame.
Mhm.
But I don't really plot them out. I just think, like, that'd be interesting to write a story about, like, a haunted gas attendant. You know what I mean? Like I just think of all the people that just have regular lives, and that's what we do as writers, especially speculative writers. The what if is the biggest part of that. So I like to really imagine mundane people and mundane situations, and really end up, I don't want to say being kind of cruel to them, but they end up getting thrust into this awful supernatural situation, but they're just a mechanic, or they're
Yeah,
just a divorced dad, or a school teacher who's tired of his job. Joy Leonard's last horror movie marathon is about a guy who has been running the last video rental store in Clifton Heights, and unfortunately is now closing. And he's a cinephile. He's a huge collection at home. Running the this last VHS DVD rental place was his life's work, and
yeah.
now that's been taken with him. And of course, in a box of VCR tapes, he finds a VCR tape he doesn't recognize, and he starts playing it. And that's my lead into the supernatural stuff. But really, my basis is, here's this guy whose life as he knows it is over, and what's he going to do next?
Yeah.
And that's really, so I don't really have a plan. It's whatever. Like, for a lot of times I write about people visiting Clifton Heights. And I have things that I want to, like, I'm actually writing my first. Clifton Heights has a racetrack, a dirt racetrack with race cars, and the story I'm writing right now is my very first story involving race cars, which I've
Oh,
always wanted,
interesting.
but it's a ghost story involving race cars.
Yeah.
So that's what I use. That's what I like to do with the Clifton Heights stories.
Awesome. Do you think that your two towns will wind up bumping into each other at any point? Like somebody from one visits the other, or
Well, I don't want to give too much away about the fate of everyone in Pleasant Brook. But in Pleasant Brook, we do have somebody who used to work in Clifton Heights and who now moved to Pleasant Brook.
oh,
So if
awesome.
so, I've got another novel that I want to write called St. Mary's Kill. That's going to be another Adirondack town, and I'll probably do the same thing there too, where maybe you have to drive through Clifton Heights to get there. That sort of
Oh,
thing.
awesome. Well, pretty soon you're just gonna have your own fictional mountain range. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Well, my own county, my
yeah,
haunted county.
oh, that's awesome. Do you have what's coming out next from you? Like, obviously, you're going to be promoting this book, but what's coming after that? And where are you promoting this?
Well, I'm promoting it everywhere. Yeah, it's on NetGalley. I sent it out to tons of reviewers. I think I've been on every single podcast. I was on a Lovecraft Easy a couple weeks ago. So, ironically, I have not only my first novel coming out, I have my second novel coming out right after that.
Oh, geez.
And my second novel couldn't be any different. It's Billy the Kid and the Lazarus Stone, and it's a weird western.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
a weird western with Billy the Kid and the regulators, and biblical myth, and flesh-eating monsters, and Solomon King, and the Nice Templar, and all this crazy stuff. That's coming out November 14th from Crossroads Press.
Okay,
Yeah, so
that super cool. We will probably see you again for that one then.
yeah, probably. Yep.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, do you think there might be a sequel to this one, the Pleasant? Do you think you might do that?
There
I mean,
will
it's
be,
pretty
yeah,
fun.
there won't be another book in Pleasant Brook. No, yeah, like I said, I don't want to give away too much what happens in the book, but there won't be a sequel. This is just, and that's what I think I'd like to do is I'd like to start. I'm going to keep playing with Clifton Heights, the town, but I want to
Hmm.
start writing more one-offs, one more just this novel and that's it. You know, like the St. Mary's Kill, it may be in the Adirondacks, but it's just going to be there. You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
want to start branching out into more one-off novels.
Okay. Yeah. St. Mary's Kill. You said you are writing that, or it's just in planning stage right now?
That's in limbo. It's
Okay.
an outline stage, yeah.
Okay, because I'm excited because that is like actually the school that I grew up with. I went to Catholic school, so I'm like, I can totally see a Catholic school would be a
Yep.
great place to have a lot of murders or
And
something.
and Kill is a oh, I can't remember. I looked it up once. There's a lot of towns in the Catskills. There's a lot of
Mhm.
Adirondack town with Kill. So St. Mary's Kill could be just a normal town in the Adirondacks, but that just sounds like a horror title. St.
Yeah.
Mary's because the kill is I can't remember what language it comes from, but it was what they called towns that were near creeks or riverbeds and things like that. So
Oh,
that's why it's the
interesting.
Catskills, you know, and there's Beavers Kill and things like that. So my idea is a small town called St. Mary's Kill, and it's going to take place in a Catholic school called St. Mary's. And like I said, there's a nice double entendre there where St. Mary's Kill would be a totally acceptable Adirondack town name, but St. Mary's Kill, that's a great horror novel name too. So
Yeah, that's awesome. That's what I would love is to have a video of you reading your book in the Adirondacks. Like so you've got the whole, and
one of
then
those, yeah.
yeah, that would be fabulous. So, well, what do you where I have so many questions right now. That's one of my favorite types of books is where you're just going through and it's almost reminds me of like a collection like of death. So this person died like this, that person dies like this, and so that's basically like a lot of present Pleasant Brook sounds like kind of like just a collection of deaths.
It
What is
is. It
what is your
is.
favorite? I actually cannot wait to read this. So I am going to go on the pre-order list. But what
What
is
is
your
my
favorite death
favorite?
in all of those?
I ripped somebody's spine out
Oh, the
after they got snapped over somebody's knee backwards, and then the spine comes out.
okay, there's also so many questions I have right now that I'm like,
I
is that
thought to myself
spoiler?
that would be really cinematic right there.
Yeah.
So,
Well, now I'm curious, what is the worst thing that's ever happened to you? Obviously, probably not that, but like physically, what is the most kind of horrendous accident and how did that play into this? Have you ever put anything like that in your work?
I haven't had any accidents per se, but I do have to say that this may have to wait. This past year, I had a knee replacement, and the total knee replacement and the recovery for that was awful. I was not prepared how much pain I was going to be, and now it's great. Now it's totally recovered, and I don't have any more arthritis in that knee. But for 2 weeks there, and the pain was awful. The pain meds they gave me made me hallucinate, and it didn't take the pain away.
Oh,
So I was tripping and still in pain. I actually
like
found
the
that
worst kind of tripping.
a horror fan couldn't watch horror movies for 2 weeks until they switched me off to different meds because the hallucinations and the movies I was watching, and then when I was trying to sleep, there was very little boundary. I actually had to be like, all right, I can't watch any horror movies until I switch my meds up because this is not working out very well. So I could see myself that could either be a short story or a novella about somebody who's especially I survived that because of my wife. You know, if I'd had to go through that on my own, especially when the meds weren't right. So I could see that being a great setup for a novella and a haunting of some sort where a guy's got to go through this harrowing, maybe recovering from an accident or something like that. And so I could see turning that into a story at some point.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think one of the things is we think if we ever got an operation for writers, if we ever get an operation or something, it's great because we're just gonna have so much time to write. But I bet you didn't do a lot of writing at that time.
No. A couple years ago, I had foot reconstruction surgery. And I got a lot of writing during then because I was non-weight bearing for 12 weeks. So there was no pain at all. I just sat in a chair and I ended up writing 4 novellas. But with the knee, they get you up walking the very same day. Like you have that massive surgery and they have you walking the next day.
Oh
So
wow.
I was in so much pain and I was so exhausted. There was no writing, no writing getting done at all.
Oh my goodness. That yeah, I don't know. I had COVID a couple years. Was that last year? I think that was just last year. Oh my goodness. And that was the thing. It's like there was a lot of writing happening. But yeah, it's not what you think it is. Like you're just gonna be sitting there,
Yeah. I remember when we got COVID, I think we just slept the whole week. Like,
yeah,
it's like we can't even remember the first 3 days we got COVID because it was like we were stumbling from the bedroom out to the couch and then back to the bedroom, and it just very, very
yeah.
hazy.
Does that figure into this story very much? Do you think that experience that you guys had it, and then because if it,
So, not being sick, but what really plays into it is when we were quarantined a couple years ago. I wasn't able to write at all during that period because everything was so surreal. And I'm sure a lot of writers, I know a lot of my writers friends posted the same thing that we were so freaked out by what was happening. None of us could really write.
mm,
But I remember because I live out in the country, and both my son and my daughter, and we all went to different schools, and I had to stay down here in my man cave and teach. And my son was upstairs, and then my daughter was up in her room, so became very isolated. And my wife had to work during the whole COVID thing because she's a nurse, so she was essential, and she didn't get laid off. So there were just days where I would just stand at my door and just looking outside, and it was so quiet, and you could feel we were all turning inward and isolating ourselves. Like I said, I live out here in the country, and we were quarantining because my wife was still working as a nurse. We were literally not leaving the house for weeks on end. And I remember thinking, I'm in no shape to write right now, but I'm going to use that someday, that sense of isolation, with that sense of like you're almost going into like a self-induced coma.
mm-hmm.
You're sleeping in late, you're staying up late, maybe drinking more than you should be because it's Tuesday, and who cares? It's Tuesday 3 a.m. Who cares? Let's have a few beers. And I thought to myself, I can't write about this right now because it's too fresh. And there's a good bit of that in the horror at Pleasant Brook, where I finally found a place to put that, because they're a small town and the infection rates are spiking, so their county has said you're all going back to remote schooling. And they've just because we've seen a lot of towns where they had to do that, where they went back and forth, and that's what's happened here. So the town is slowly falling asleep again as this evil is creeping through.
Oh,
So
which is just a fantastic time to fall asleep, right?
right, exactly.
Well, that's awesome. Everybody, go find this link in the description so that you can go get your copy of this book. Do you have any advice that you can tell writers? Like, what do you suggest, especially working at Cemetery Dance, being the editor there? You have a lot of experience. What would you tell the new horror writers, the new crop that's coming up?
Probably the same thing that I tell a lot of people. First of all, read everything. I really feel right now there's not I'm not going to be controversial, I promise. But I feel like there's a false dichotomy out there where people are either like, read only the old voices, that new stuff's trash. Read only the new progressive stuff, that old stuff's trash. We don't need those old guys anymore. And I'm like, just read it all. You know, you need to read the old stuff to know where we've been so that you don't accidentally recreate that. You need to read the new stuff so you can see where we're going. You know, and then if you do all of that, then you're going to take your spin. Like the horror at Pleasant Brook is very much an 80s B movie creature feature, but it's got a modern cast. You know, it's set post COVID. There's modern characters. So I wanted to take something that was old school and make it mine. And that's the one thing I would tell any young horror writers: read the classic stuff, read the contemporary stuff, read the new avant-garde stuff, read it all. Okay, that's the best way to get a balanced reading diet. And when it comes to writing, find a time of day that works for you. And I know some people this doesn't work. This is what's worked for me. Find a time of day, make that time of day sacred, and keep to that schedule. About 15 years ago, I started getting up at 3:30 in the morning to write because I'm a teacher. I'm an English teacher, so I'm no good writing at the end of the day. That's for sure. And I'm a morning person. So now, whether I really want to or not, even if I don't feel like writing that day, 4:30 comes along and I'm awake. So I'm
Yeah.
like, well, I'm going to go down and write. I may not write for a full hour. I may only write for 30 minutes today, but I'm going to go down and I'm going to write. And you'd be amazed how many words pile up in just 1 year.
Yeah.
Just getting up for an hour a day and just writing. And I'm not going to say 2,000 words a day. I'm not going to say pages because, man, there's some days when those words just tore right out of me. And there are some days where I was like, all right, I've rewritten this paragraph 5 times. You know what I mean? See, that it's different every day. But the thing is, I stuck to that schedule, and every now and then I'll give myself permission to take. After I finish a project, I'll give myself a permission to sleep in. But the great thing is like I said, it's hardwired in my body now, so I can't even sleep in if I want to. So I might as well get up and work on something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what's next?
Yep.
Well, that's awesome advice. I appreciate you giving that to all of us. Where can we find you?
You can find me on Facebook and Twitter. If anyone actually still goes on Twitter,
Yeah,
X. Yeah, I haven't jumped over to Blue Sky yet because I just don't feel like when I finally log on one day and Twitter is completely in flames and it's not there anymore, then I'll probably go move over to Blue Sky. But I'm on Facebook, and that's where pretty much I hang my hat. So come find me there and add me
awesome.
there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Good luck with this book. I cannot wait to read it myself.
Awesome.
Again, everybody that's watching, link in the descriptions. This goes live on October 13th. So pre-order it now.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for being on the show, Kevin.
Thanks for having me.